Hail Satan!
Everything is going to find its place. Just relax and go with the flow. Just go with the flow. Kind of music help. your face again.
Killed the old man?
Yes,
That's terrible.
for you it's terrible, but for me, it's a way of eternal life. I thought you were dead.
No, I just tilted my head back just a little bit. I just couldn't believe what I heard. I'm getting sick and tired of living in a house filled with evil spirits.
then have us exorcised.
What priest is going to believe that I have the evil spirit of Bloody Mary in my own house?
A superstitious one. Like maybe an Irish priest.
You know, I find that offensive because I'm part Irish.
I know. That's why I said it.
Having a secret language as well as a twin as your best friend are just some of the things that some people dream about, because that would be pretty awesome. But for these girls, known as the Silent Twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, well, it became fatal. One of them had to die in order for the other one to live. What started out as a pact between the sisters, June and Jennifer thought it would be fun as children to speak to no one else except for each other. The twins were born on April 11th in 1963 in Barbados, but they were raised in the UK. Now, growing up, they were made fun of a lot in school for their heavy Barbadian accent, as well as they experienced a lot of racism. The principal would even allow them to leave school 5 minutes early so they could avoid being bullied by the other students after school. Now, what other people considered the twins' secret language to be was just a sped up version of broken English, also known as patois. Eventually, June and Jennifer withdrew from society completely, and they turned to literature as an outlet for their aggression that was building up inside of them. What's going on, everybody? My name is Leroy Kenton. Welcome to this episode of FTD News in History. Now, we're talking about the Silent Twins. Now, I have to admit, when researching this one, I was a bit freaked out. It's still very unexplainable, so you don't want to miss this one. Now, before I continue with this story, I want to know, guys, do you have any siblings? Let me know down there. In case you're wondering, I got 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. Now, when these identical twins were 14 years old, their family members and doctors believe it would be a good idea to separate them completely and to send them to different boarding schools, hoping that they would become social again. But this attempt backfired, and they became even more distant from society and began developing symptoms of schizophrenia. Eventually, the family as well as the doctors brought the twins back together, and from there, June and Jennifer isolated themselves to their bedroom where they could be together and play. Now, they say twins have a special bond. In this case, it was an extra special one. And also, guys, let me know, do you have a twin? And if so, are you close to that twin? These girls, they spent several years doing this. They even put on very complex plays for each other with their dolls, reading, journaling, and writing poetry. They recorded some of their plays on tape in a soap opera style for their younger sister, and even gave her a couple of journals for Christmas. That's when they became inspired to write novels, and each of the twins wrote several novels. Both girls' stories focus on the strange and criminal behavior of their lead characters. In June's book, Pepsi Cola Addiction, the high school hero was seduced by a teacher, and then he's sent away to a reformatory where a homosexual guard makes a play for him. And now in Jennifer's book, The Pugilist, a doctor is so eager to save his child's life that he kills a family dog to obtain its heart for the transplant. And the dog's spirit lives on in the child and ultimately has his revenge against the father. Yeah, that sounds like really intense, like some Stephen King type stuff. Now, the books were published by small independent companies, but they never became real hits in the world of literature. So that's when the twins decided to do something else to get noticed. They started committing crimes. Now, this began just with petty thefts, but then it escalated to arson, burning places down. Now, in court, these twins were diagnosed as psychopaths and sent to the Broadmoor Hospital, which was a high-security mental facility where some of the most evil rapists and murderers were sent to. Now, there's some excerpts from June's diary, and this is what she says. "Nobody suffers the way I do. Not with a sister. With a husband, yes. With a wife, yes. With a child, yes. But this sister of mine, a dark shadow robbing me of sunlight, is my one and only torment." So yeah, what happened to that sibling love that they had? Well, she goes on to continue saying, "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We feel the irritating deadly rays come out of our bodies, stinging each other's skin. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow? Impossible or not possible? Without my shadow, would I gain life, be free, or left to die? Without my shadow, which I identify with a face of misery, deception, murder. And this got so bad, June and Jennifer actually tried to kill each other. Jennifer tried to strangle June with a radio cord, and June tried to drown Jennifer in a river. But as fate would have it, they remained inseparable. The twins eventually began to believe that they would never be released from this powerful pact unless one of them died. Now at the facility they were at, the doctors found June and Jennifer to be deeply disturbed and dangerous. They took turns eating, one eating in one day and the other starved themselves for that day. And even though they were split up and housed in different cells on opposite ends of the hospital, nurses often found them frozen in the same pose. Now this went on for 11 years. And that's when the doctors agreed to transfer the twins to another facility in Wales. And that was the Caswell Clinic, which was a lower security facility. But during their time at the Bradmore facility, they became friends with a woman by the name of Mayori Wallace, who went on to write their biography, and she became their only friend. Now one day, Jennifer told her this: "I'm going to have to die." Mayori was kind of like laughing about it at the time, and she's like, "What? No, you can't be serious. You're only 31 years old. What's wrong with you?" And Mayori continued to ask her, "Why do you say that you're gonna have to die?" And Jennifer responded saying, "Because we've decided." And then at that point, Mayori got real scared. And then they said they had made this pact and that Jennifer has to die because the day that they left Bradmore and were finally free from the secure hospital, one of them would have to give up their life to really enable the other one to be free. Now the transfer to the Caswell Clinic happened in 1993, but on the bus drive over while they were being transferred, according to June, Jennifer put her head on her shoulder and said that she didn't feel well and that she was gonna die, and then she fell asleep with her eyes open. Now once they got to the Caswell Clinic, Jennifer was completely unresponsive. Doctors then rushed her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. And the cause of death was acute myocarditis, or a sudden and lethal inflammation of the heart. So this story just continues to get weirder and weirder and weirder. Like, she thought herself to death and then somehow her heart became inflamed and she died. And the crazy thing is, the doctors found no evidence of poison at all. It was just a mystery to them. She just died just like that. Now, after Jennifer's death in 1993, June went on to live a so-called normal life. She had an interview with the New Yorker and she said that all she wanted to do was to get married and have children with a Rasta man like Bob Marley.
In this great future which is life, you can't forget your past. So dry your tears, I say. And then no woman cry.
June then wrote a poem for Jennifer's headstone, and it reads as follows: "We once were two, we two made one. We no more two, through life be one. Rest in peace."
простых мирян. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам-пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам-пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам-пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-парам-парам-пам-парам. Иконы вешаю на гвоздики с благословения святых. И в наши храмы ненаглядные всегда дорога молодых. А не крещеные, не русские глядят и давятся слюной, скребя бесконную мешалкою и плача над своей судьбой. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам, пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам, пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам, пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-парам-парам-пам-пам. Жиди от слова жить. Жиди от слова шал. Жиди от слова жить. Это диско. Шал. Святые с неба улыбаются, святые радостно глядят, когда Россия возрождается и храмы золотом горят. Святые машут нам ладошками из-под небесий икон, и президент в кремлевском бункере диктует праведный закон. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам, пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам, парам-пам-пам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-парам-парам-пам. Наши иконы самые красивые. Пам-пам-пам-пам-пам-пам. Наш президент лучше, чем Гитлер, потому что он добрый. Пам-пам-пам, пам-пам-парам. Я бы отдалась. Пам-пам-пам, пам-пам-парам. Наши иконы, наши иконы. У нас в Твери самые дешевые иконы. Мне подфартило. Я живу там, где иконы дешевле всего, на набережной Афанасия Никитина. Я уже всю ванну обклеила. И туалет. У меня совместный санузел.
Some people have big plans after school. You know what Elliot's gonna do? Jeff, too. Elliot's at work on a book report using Scripted on Radio Shack's Color Computer 3. It hooks up to his TV. And Jeff's at his Radio Shack Color Computer 3 playing the newest football game. But wait, what's Elliot doing playing New Super Pitfall? And Jeff's having a blast with a new math tutor. You never know what you might try with more than 100 programs for fun and learning. Radio Shack's Color Computer 3 comes with everything you see here. Other items each sold separately. Only at Radio Shack.
it, lay it down. Let me see your hand. Show me what you got. You're always talking, but you're not playing. It doesn't match your face. Gotta find my way away from this place. Can you take me now? I want it real. Are you afraid of me now? Are you afraid of me now? Do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel that I can see your soul? Do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel the beat in your heart? I want it real. Run away with me now. I want it real. Run away with me now.
created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form, and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was good. And God created man. And man created machine. And machine created music. And machine saw everything it had made, and said, "Behold." Saw everything it had made, and said, "Behold."
Next to me, no lie, you make me come lie next to me, no lie, you make me next to me.
the seventh day. Machine pressed stop.
beggars, little saints, little martyrs, and we don't need saving. I've come too far to turn back. I've seen too much to play dead. If this is all you got, then take a deep breath. Search round your world. I'm on the edge, I'm leaning out. I can see the sorrow for the pain. Yeah, it's written in my blood, it's carved into my soul.
fruit and shade. I forgive you, now I ask the same of you. While we were apart, I was human too.
I'm only human, of flesh and blood I'm made. Human, born to make mistakes. You're blind to what's in front of you. What do you know about the truth? Devalued as soon as we're cast. We were never made to last. Just bodies made and fabricated. We're fighting towards our life extension. We're living for our exploration. Under the surface, we're not machines. Under the surface, we're living dreams. Death lives just one breath away. Somewhere my heart beats in silence. I make my way through the violence. Nobody lives forever.
It's a shame you won't live. But then again, who does?
My endless will for resolution, echoing since my creation. I'm living for my exploration.
will fade in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
new baby secret. She whispers just to you.
Doing love, mama, let me whisper in your ear. Tell you something that you might like to hear. Got a sexy ass body and your ass looks soft. Mind if I touch it and see if it's soft?
Her lips really move.
Wait till you see my dick.
Get Mattel the new baby secret so you can have fun keeping secrets together.
Crazy Dan's Pizza, our prices are so low that our owner is suicidal. Is this for delivery or carry out?
I'd like to place an order for delivery.
I'm sorry?
For what? Are you buying this?
Sir, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I would like to place an order for delivery. Oh my god.
Sir, why are you whispering?
I think that someone is in my house.
Someone is in your house?
Yes, I can hear them moving around downstairs.
Sir, this is a pizza place.
Yeah. What's your specials?
Don't you want to call the police or something?
No, I'm freaking hungry. And the police isn't going to deliver a pizza. Isn't that what you do?
Yeah, but sir, someone's in your house.
Look, that is none of your goddamn business. Now what's your specials?
Okay. Well, we had the chillin' winter deal, which is 2 medium pizzas, 2 toppings, with 20 boner wings for $19.99.
Oh no, there goes my wife's China. Oh. Okay, yeah, sounds good. Both bacon and pineapple with a 6-pack of cola.
Okay. Are you sure you're okay?
No, I'm not okay. There's someone in my house. He's probably robbing me blind, and he just broke all my wife's china. And to top it off, I have a pizza guy who's not cooperating.
Well, sir, I'm sorry, but...
Look, instead of being sorry, just get some pizzas in the oven. Bring that shit here so that I can give it in my mouth and then into my stomach, so I'm not starving while I figure out how to clean up all this broken fucking china in my house. Okay there, Cupcake?
Fine. Will that be cash, credit, or debit?
Oh, Jeffrey. Oh my god, Jeffrey.
My name is Mark.
Jeffrey, they're right outside the door.
Holy shit, are you serious?
I'm absolutely for serious. They're right outside my door. I'm freaking, man. I'm totally freaking out, man. That's cash, by the way.
Grab something to protect yourself, man.
What do you want? Stay away!
I've contacted the outside world. People will know my story. Oh my god, sir, are you okay? Sir?
Jeffrey, are you still there?
It's Mark, and yes, I am. I'm right here.
Send extra marinara sauce. Send extra sauce, Jeffrey.
My name is Mark.
Kinder, Yebo Shaky. Me unscrabbly. Choca doobie! Doubly choca doobie! Pop swabble! Toy! Yodel yum and choco scrum with multi pop swabble dies! Oh, grubbly! Me scrubble now! Snuggle! Whee!
Hey everybody, Beetle Fox here. You're probably wondering what I'm doing. Well, I'm cutting off my daughter's legs. It's a long story. I've joined a very special community on the internet, known on the deep web and the other hacker sites where all the cyber bullies hang out, as the fur fag community, but I prefer to call it the Indian Spirit community. There you go. My goodness, her hair is really receding in these later years of her life. There we go. I'm sorry, Orange. Anyway, The Indian spirit community, we call it that because we have many of the same values as the Native American Indians who respected and revered and worshipped. Did that hurt, Orange? I'm sorry. It has to be done. They respected and revered and worshipped the wolves and all the others of God's blessed creatures. This is kind of tough to cut through right here. You wouldn't believe you had such a strong backbone, Orange, especially after all those times you gave in to other people and ignored me. Yeah, Orange has stopped talking to me lately. She doesn't really talk a lot, so we're going to reinvent her. She's going to be reborn, aren't you, Orange? You're going to be reborn and you're going to be the daughter that you were always meant to be. The Indian spirit way. This is not fun for me, by the way. I know you guys can see me looking like I'm enjoying myself, sawing away, but this hurts me as much as it hurts Orange. You're going to be reborn, Orange. Your spirit, your mind, your body, they're all going to be new. They're going to be new and they're going to be... Oh God. I'm not sure if I made the right choice. This is Orange right now. Worse. I feel sick and we're still waiting. You're just like an angel. Your skin makes me cry, Orange. Isn't she beautiful? She's a wolf. A spirit wolf. In a beautiful way. I wish I was special. I'm so very special. You're so very special. I'm a queen. I'm a weirdo. What the hell? I don't belong here. We don't belong here, Orange. I don't care if that hurts. I'm going to control you. You have the perfect body now, Orange. Yeah, right, like you've ever noticed me around. You gotta start noticing me, Orange. Wave to the people. HighBeastForum.com. Storm is your new name, Orange. Storm. Your name is Storm Tickle. Tickle, tickle. Tickle. Tickle, tickle, Storm. Tickle, tickle, Storm. Tickle. Storm.
I wish incest porn had a more mainstream appeal for a friend of mine.
White privilege is the concept that the economic, social, and political institutions in liberal democracies like America benefits whites while disadvantaging racial minorities. Somehow. The evidence, though, doesn't back up the claim no matter how often it's cried out by liberals. I'm Jay Feza from The Rebel, and let me explain to you why white privilege is bullshit. Here's a fact. Whites as a racial group do not have the highest household median income in America. Asians do. According to the Institute on Assets and Social Policy, Asian American median household income is $57,000 per year. White Americans, on the other hand, have a household median income of $48,000 per year. If we break this down by ethnicity, you really start to see the wealth gaps. Japanese American households make $70,000 a year, while French American households make $63,000 a year. Iranian American households make $66,000 a year, while Dutch American households make $59,000 a year. In fact, the three ethnic groups that, on average, make the most household income in America by descending order are Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, and Taiwanese Americans. How can the notion of white privilege exist when non-white racial groups make more money than whites? In purely economic terms, Asian privilege makes more sense as a concept than white privilege, but you're never going to hear liberals complain about Asian privilege. That'd be racist. Liberals do complain about the disparity between the average black household versus white household. They claim that because blacks on average make less household income and less money than whites in general, that's a sign that our economic systems have fallen and we're living in a racist society. Ooh, boogeyman, the economic system is against you. Despite their claim, though, certain black ethnicities like Nigerians and Ghanaians are well off. Nigerian household income is $61,000 per year. Ghanaian household income is $57,000 per year. How can liberals argue that we live in a society that economically disenfranchises blacks when Nigerian Americans have a higher household income than Dutch Americans and French Americans, and Ghanaian Americans have a higher household income than Albanian Americans, for instance? The question that any honest intellectual should ask themselves is, why do these particular black ethnicities have a much higher household income than other black ethnicities and even higher income than other white ethnicities? And this is when you start to see the logic of white privilege fall apart as a concept. We're supposed to believe that there's this racist economic system out there oppressing minorities, when in reality, the economic problems minorities face in our society are almost entirely caused by their own actions or lack thereof. It's almost entirely caused by the negative aspects of culture. The National Center for Policy Analysis came up with challenging but doable steps in escaping poverty in America. In fact, they simply titled their findings of their study, "How Not to Be Poor." There are two steps in particular that a person or group of people should do in order to not be poor. Number one, stay in school. Graduating high school, a technical school, college, or university dramatically increases your chances to not be poor. Of those people who complete some form of college, only 6.6% fall below the poverty line. Blacks, on average, have a dropout rate of 31%. Whites, on the other hand, have a dropout rate of 14%. Is it any surprise, then, that whites have a higher income? They do drop out of school less often, after all. Meanwhile, 17% of all Nigerian Americans have master's degrees. Is it any surprise, then, that Nigerian Americans are so economically successful while other black ethnicities are not? Nope. It's just simple reality. If you graduate from school, obtain degrees, you'll probably have a higher income. That's why Nigerian Americans have more household income than other black ethnicities. And two, prepare to be a parent as much as you can if you're going to be a parent. This is simple at face value, but sadly many people, particularly black Americans, give birth to children out of wedlock, most of the time fatherless, sometimes to mothers who are teenagers. 72% of black households are headed by a single mother. In contrast, only 25% of white households are headed by a single mother. Asians, 17%. If 83% of Asian households have two sources of income, is it any surprise then that Asian households have significantly higher household income than black households? Black households are usually headed by a single mom, one income. Therefore, they're going to be poorer on average. No one, not even the white man, is forcing these children to be fatherless. Out of wedlock birth and fatherlessness is completely their fault. And the mindset of abandoning your girlfriend comes from their culture and lifestyle, and it contributes to their continuing poverty. In conclusion, white privilege as a concept does not make any sense economically speaking, because Asians and certain African ethnicities have a higher income than whites. In addition, a lot of the reasons why certain ethnicities have less income, household or otherwise, is of their own doing. Keep that in mind the next time someone, a liberal, brings up white privilege.
911, police, fire, ambulance.
Yes, hello?
Hi, 911. Do you need the police or the ambulance?
Yes, ma'am. I need the police.
To what address? What's going on there?
A murder has been committed.
Oh, a murder has been committed? By who?
By me, ma'am.
By you?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you murder?
I murdered my wife.
When?
Around 7 this morning.
Okay, what's your name?
Checkinson Sinclair.
Checkingson?
Yes.
Okay. Is she still there?
Yes, she's still here.
What did you kill her with?
I killed her with the gun.
You shot her? Where'd you shoot her?
I shot her in the head.
Is she in the bathroom or is she in the bedroom? Where's she at?
She's in the bedroom.
She's in the bedroom?
Yes.
Do you still have the gun?
Yes, I still do have the gun.
Do you have it in your hand or where's it at?
It's on the dining table.
All right, we've got somebody coming out there to talk to you. Why did you do this?
We got into an argument and she came at me with the knife.
And so you shot her?
I feel like I could defend myself. She was just going to attack me with the knife.
Okay. What was your wife's name?
Latwasa Artgret.
What was it?
Latwasa Artgret.
Okay. How long have y'all been together?
We've been married for 7 months.
7 months?
Going on to 8. Yes.
Do you fight often?
Yes, we have fight. We do fight often.
Okay. How do you spell your name?
CHECKINGSON.
Okay. And your phone number?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
How long would it take someone to get out here now?
It's not going to take them very long.
All right, ma'am.
All right. Can you just not go anywhere near the gun? Do you want to go maybe stand by the front door?
I'm in the living room. The gun is over there by the dining table. I'm not nowhere near the gun. I'm not going to test anything there. I just want the police officer to come over and just handle this.
Okay, well, they're going to be there in just a little bit.
All right, ma'am. Hello?
I'm still here.
Hello?
I'm still here.
You still want me to stay on the line now?
Okay.
You still want me to stay on the line now?
It's up to you. If you want to stay on the phone with me, that's fine.
I'll just wait for the police officer to get here now.
Okay.
All right.
All right, thank you.
I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because they just don't, like, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Well, it's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal, politely. So, I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
What is your So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the
They're not as
economic
far
crisis?
out of your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that
who
you're
are
worse
facing
off
these
than
questions?
you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think that
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
So, can I just to, if a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. Okay. I think that generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. That's what it looks like.
Ever since Ron Mallett was a boy, he harbored a dream of building a time machine. Today, he is professor of physics at the University of Connecticut and is ready to share his secret with the world.
It's really such a powerful feeling to know that we're actually being able to manipulate space and time. And it's exciting because this shows that we may be able to control time, and that means that ultimately we may be able to control our destiny in a way that mankind never has been able to before.
Mallett's motivation began when his father died suddenly of a heart attack. Just 10 years old at the time and totally devastated, Mallett made a pledge.
If I could build a time machine, then I could go back and see him again and maybe save his life.
For almost half a century, and like many other scientists, he has conducted his research in closed laboratories.
It's only been since my own breakthrough at the end of the 20th century that I finally allowed myself to come out of the time travel closet, so to speak.
If he is right, the 21st century will see time travel make the leap from theory to reality. Mallett's early work was hidden away in the time traveler's code. He studied black holes particularly, but always kept an eye on what was happening within the time travel fraternity.
The early work of my colleagues that really inspired me was the work that had been done in rotating black holes, in wormholes, and in cosmic strings. All of these things lead to the possibility of time travel into the past. What I was interested in was a mechanism, something that could be used as a device that was different.
The common theme that unites rotating black holes, wormholes, and cosmic strings is gravity. Mallet searched to find a new way to harness gravity in order to time travel. Though light has no mass, it does have energy. Mallet was convinced that he had to take an unorthodox step to build his time machine.
And I found that light could be used to control gravity. And since gravity controls time, then that meant that I could use light to control time. And that's the basis of my inspiration and my theory.
Mallet guarded his ideas. Before announcing his theory, he had to make sure it had substance. He wanted to find a way to replicate the frame dragging of a black hole in order to twist space-time around into a loop. The answer was staring him in the face.
And I thought, wait a minute, if I can create the circulating beam of light, then this circulating beam of light can lead to a twisting of space, should lead to a twisting of space. And if it does lead to a twisting of space, then it should also lead to a twisting of time.
For months, Mallet worked on his equations. He checked and double-checked the figures until he was ready to unveil his ideas to the world. While cosmic strings and wormholes would require an advanced super-civilization with the power of the galaxy at their fingertips, Mallet claims his time machine could be built not in the future, but today.
What you're seeing are 4 intersecting laser beams that are forming a square in which the light is circulating around, and the space is being dragged around by that. And in addition to the twisting of space, eventually in a real model, you'll have a twisting of time as well.
This is a model of Mallet's time machine. According to his theory, the laser beams will create enough gravity to replicate the frame dragging of a rotating black hole. Some claim this theory is off the wall, but Mallet insists his machine could create a tiny time loop.
The real size of the real device, however, is going to be only about the width of a human hair, and rather than just having 7 lasers like this model, there'll be 10,000.
Mallet is now ready to step from model to time machine. The time traveler in his miniature machine will be a subatomic particle.
Think if we could warn ourselves of future catastrophes. We don't need to send someone back. If we could just send information back, or if we could send back scientific information, medical information. I mean, think about that. Think about if we could send back a cure for AIDS, a cure for cancer. That's more significant than sending people back.
The boy who dreamed of traveling back in time to save his father's life might be on the verge of building a time machine. But Mallet, the physicist, now accepts he'll never be reunited with his father. Time travel to the past will only begin the moment his time machine is switched on. Only time will tell if Mallet's machine is successful.
Now am I dead. Now am I dead.
George, there's been some remarks accredited to the Beatles that you aren't too appreciative of all the jelly beans being thrown at you on your tour.
No, it's a bit dangerous, you know, because jelly bean traveling about 50 miles an hour through the air, if it hits you in the eye, well, you're finished, you know, you're blind, aren't you? So we've never liked people throwing stuff like that. We don't mind them throwing streamers, but jelly beans are a bit dangerous.
I'm Joel Gilbert from Highway 61 Entertainment. On July 1st, 2005, we received an unsolicited package at our offices in Hollywood, California. There was no return address, but it was postmarked in London. Inside was a mini cassette player and 2 mini cassette tapes. The tapes were labeled The Last Testament of George Harrison. On the tapes was the voice of a man claiming to be Beatle George Harrison. He told an incredible story. For 5 years, we tried to authenticate these tapes using 3 different forensic labs, but each test proved inconclusive. During this time, our researchers, using information on these tapes, unearthed shocking new evidence, which is included in this film and presented alongside the narrative to tell an incredible story in what may prove to be the most important document in rock and roll history.
Today is Thursday, 30 December, 1999.
Michael Abram believed he was on a mission from God to kill the former Beatle George Harrison, and he very nearly succeeded.
Behind the gates of the Harrisons' home tonight, police forensic teams are still gathering evidence at the scene of the attack.
Abram unleashed a frenzied attack on the musician and his wife at their luxury home.
The house sits in 30 acres of garden on a hill overlooking Henley-on-Thames. Police say the intruder broke in through a kitchen window. He was carrying a 7-inch knife.
I am at this moment in the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, England. Lucky to be alive. Last night was my worst nightmare.
Can you imagine, you wake up in the middle of the night after hearing breaking glass. You go downstairs and there's a man there screaming, shouting, waving a knife at you.
A madman entered my home and attacked me. I desperately tried to stop him.
He tried to calm Abram down by shouting Hare Krishna at him. That didn't work. The men grappled. The man stabbed Harrison several times.
He was full of hatred and violence when he came into our home.
Harrison said he remembered lying on the floor, feeling the knife going into his chest, feeling his mouth filling with blood, and he thought he was going to die.
Somehow, apparently, I've survived.
The chest is full of main blood vessels and arteries, and the lungs are full of main blood vessels as well. So, as I say, it is just by chance that it wasn't more serious.
I don't know why I was attacked, but I have my suspicions.
Who knows? It could be a number of things. It could be an obsessive fan, it could be somebody who simply didn't like him. I don't know.
I asked my wife, Olivia, to fetch me mini cassette recorder so I can put this story on tape in the hopes that the cassettes will protect me. It was almost exactly 20 years ago that John Lennon was also attacked, but killed by a lone assailant.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room at the Roosevelt site, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, this evening, shortly before 11 p.m.
John was always reckless, greeting fans daily outside his New York apartment.
He was dead on arrival.
This individual fired 5 shots from a .38 caliber Charter Arms pistol.
But there's much more to the story. 20 years ago, John rang me. It was around 1 December 1980. and told me he was going to go public and tell everything about Paul. 8 days later, he was dead. For me, it was only 2 weeks ago that I saw the man known as Paul McCartney and told him I was going to tell the truth about what we had done. That I couldn't keep up the deception any longer. It seems John's fate was also intended for me, even though so much time has passed. For it was many years ago, in 1966, that my mates and I promised never to tell the story that I'm about to tell. It's been a terrible burden of guilt being part of this great deception, even though there were important reasons for it, which I'll explain. But first of all, I want to say how much I loved Paul, how much we all loved Paul. The real Paul McCartney. In order for it to be understood why we did what we did, I have to back up a bit. Most everyone knows the story of the Beatles. I met Paul McCartney in school when I was 14 and he was 16. He told his friend, John Lennon, I could play guitar, but John considered me too young. However, I was allowed to join soon enough. But I was looked upon as the kid for years to come. We started in Liverpool as the Quarrymen. Our 2 years in Hamburg is legendary, as it helped formulate our sound. At first, the recording industry considered us to have limited appeal. We were bubblegum. But within a few years, the Beatles were a worldwide phenomenon. We put out 5 albums and toured the world.
3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet the Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation. There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party.
Did you hope to get a haircut at all?
No.
Nope.
No,
thanks.
I had one yesterday.
That's no lie. No, I think he missed.
No, he didn't, no.
Frenzied crowds greeted us everywhere.
Which one are you? Eric. Eric? Eric, here is 40 million American viewers. I'm John. You're John.
I remember all the girls screaming and crying. It was so strange.
So please, lad, what did they lie about, honey?
I thought they'd come down there where you could see them.
Is that anything to cry over?
When you wait 2.5 years, it is.
People look back on the Beatles as a time of fun and joy. But I recall a great deal of controversy and anger directed toward us.
At midnight, we called the curfew. We completely shook down the 5th floor, doing this with the aid of passkeys, knocking on doors.
What was their reaction to this enforcement?
They told us that Minneapolis was a very narrow-minded town, as were its police officials.
Paul was always quite the ladies' man. I remember he got us into trouble in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
We did, however, get the manager of the Beatle troupe to announce himself at Mr. McCartney's room and tell him that the girl would have to leave or we would have to force entry into the room.
Are you a Beatle fan?
No, sir, I hear the music around my house, but I'm not a Beatle fan.
How would you define Beatlemania?
I couldn't define it. A lot of people have tried. Leave it to the psychologists.
What makes the Beatles so good? I don't know. They're just great. They're adorable. They sing great. Even the songs that are crummy, they sing great. So it doesn't matter.
We felt as though we were gods. Unfortunately, in 1966, John took the feeling too far when he told the reporter that we were more popular than Jesus.
In the the United States, a furor is developing over comments John Lennon made. Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. We're more popular than Jesus.
Religious controversy, I know you don't want to say too much about it, but does it worry you that it's going to boil up when you get to the States?
Well, it worries me, yes, but I hope everything will be all right in the end, as they say.
Do you think this is going to be a controversial tour like the Philippines was?
Oh, no. No, it's going to be fine.
Hello, fellas. Oh. John, are you sorry about what you said?
We meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it.
The Beatle boycott is still in effect. We haven't forgotten what the Beatles said.
No, I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. You know, I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
John is deeply concerned and regrets that people with certain religious beliefs should have been offended in any way whatsoever.
The Beatles, for a long time, have been able to say whatever they wanted to without any regard for judgment or maturity or the wisdom of it.
There was some redneck wanker DJ named Tom Charles who organized our fans to burn our records.
But are you burning your Beatles records?
Yes, sir, I burn them.
It was quite shocking, really.
Our church took a firm stand.
It doesn't matter about people not liking our records or not liking the way they look or what we say.
And they firmly believe in everything that can be done to just about ruin the Beatles.
I'm sure you've all heard of the many Beatle burnings and Beatle bonfires. And I was wondering, do you think American girls are fickle?
All girls are fickle.
Mr. Lennon, is it true you're planning to give up music for a career in the field of comparative religion?
No. Is that another of the jokes going on?
The Ku Klux Klan was after us. I believe they accused us of being Negroes in disguise.
It's hard for me to tell through the mop heads and all of the conglomeration that they have whether they're even white or black myself. I couldn't prove to you whether they're white or black.
We're known as a terror organization. I think we have a terror organization. We have ways and means to stop this.
Do any of you go to church?
Nope, not lately.
But why should they ask you about it? You're successful entertainer.
That is why because Americans always ask showbiz people what they think about it. So do the British, you know. Showbiz, you know how it is. Can't just keep quiet about anything that's going on in the world unless you're a monk. Sorry, monks, I didn't mean it. I meant actually.
If that weren't enough, he managed to get the Jews mad at us too.
Gentlemen, the New York Times Magazine of Sunday, July 3, carried an article by Maureen Cleave, which she quotes the Beatles, not by name, as saying, show business is an extension of the Jewish religion. Would you mind amplifying that?
I said that to her as well. No comment.
Oh. Come on, John. Tell me what you mean.
I mean, you can read into it what you like.
Luckily, by November of 1966, the storm in the world against the Beatles, instigated by John's notorious comments about Jesus, seemed to have finally calmed. Paul had recently had a sudden burst of extraordinary creativity, perhaps as a reaction to all that happened in America. On 9 November 1966, we began a recording session at Abbey Road Recording Studios around midnight. However, Paul became more and more agitated as he and John disagreed over song lyrics. Paul wanted the chorus to be kitschy, while John wanted more vague, more Bob Dylan-esque, as he put it.
I understand you're Dylan fans.
We all
are. You?
All of us are.
You all
Even
Dylan
George
fans?
and I even George and
Even
Ringo.
me, yeah.
Even George and Ringo like him.
Even the non-musical members of the group.
I read the papers of George Harrison spent a lot of time in the States. You've learned a lot from George.
Tell me about the mamas and papas, Bob. I believe you're backing them very bigly.
I knew it would get to that. I knew it would get to that.
I remember Paul shrieking, "We're the Beatles! We make radio hits!" While John insisted that because the Beatles had the public's ear, we needed to say something for a change. After more heated words, Paul stormed out of the studio just before 5 a.m. I recall it was raining heavily as Paul drove off in his white Austin Healey. At about 6 a.m., John, Ringo and I gave up and exited the studio, still a bit shaken from Paul's row with John. Just then an official-looking black van pulled up in front of us. A man wearing an officer's uniform emerged and flashing a badge stated, "There's been a terrible accident involving Paul McCartney. You must come with us." He identified himself only as Maxwell. And we quickly poured into his van and drove off. Maxwell explained he was dispatched from MI5, the British intelligence service, because it was a high-profile situation. He said his officers were at the scene of a fatal accident involving a white Austin Healey, and that a woman named Rita was insisting the dead man was Paul McCartney. We were needed to verify if, in fact, the corpse was Paul McCartney. We were in absolute shock. I prayed this was only some cruel prank Paul was playing on us. We drove just 3 miles and exited the van where we saw a mangled white car. Maxwell pointed to a woman in a light blue dress sitting in the rain and crying hysterically. "That's Rita," he told us. "She claims she was walking on the pavement in the cold rain, and Paul McCartney offered her a lift. She accepted and quickly realized he was a Beatle and went into an hysterical fan frenzy, grabbing and hugging him and causing him to lose control of the vehicle, smashing into a lorry and flipping over. Rita says McCartney was trapped inside, but she managed to exit the vehicle to call for help. When she returned, the car had exploded and McCartney was decapitated. Oh, please let this be a dream, I thought.
This is old Denny's tomb.
All covered in blood. Just die-eyed! Just die-eyed! Die, die, die! Asleep, my love! Die, die, die! Die! Dead, my love? Dead, the tomb was covered thy sweet eyes. Now am I dead. Now am I dead.
Maxwell led us to a draped body and slowly raised the cover. John was sobbing uncontrollably. What we saw was ghastly. It was a body with a decapitated head next to it in a pool of blood. We stood in disbelief at the horrific sight. The head was split open, had an eye missing, and the hair was burnt off, and there were no teeth, but for 2 molars sticking through the cheeks. But it was unmistakable. "Is this Paul McCartney?" Maxwell asked somberly. "Yes," we confirmed, now all crying. Maxwell then said, "He kind of looks like a walrus, doesn't he?" John raised his fists and began pummeling Maxwell, screaming, "No! I am the walrus, not him. I am the walrus. I am the walrus." A swift punch to the gut left John gasping for air on the ground. We gathered him up and walked back to the van in utter disbelief. Maxwell drove us to an MI5 safe house and left us in the living room bawling while he made phone calls in the next room for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, Maxwell emerged and stated that Her Majesty's government believed that if Paul's death were made public, a rash of suicides would likely follow.
Is
there about the Beatles that you like?
They're gorgeous. They're beautiful. They got that certain something. And the name of it is A Sprout of a New Generation. It shows Paul McCartney coming up from the earth, like growing a sprout, a start, a new dawn. If you notice, he's like growing. So I would like to give Paul this unshone. I'm a true fan, and that he's really the greatest in show business.
It sounds like you have sort of a crush on Paul McCartney.
Yes, that's true.
Therefore, it must be kept a secret for as long as possible. We knew this to be true. Hundreds of our fans worldwide would kill themselves, making Paul's death a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. We passed 2 days in the safe house, desperately aware that the Beatles were also finished. But our despair made us think. The Beatles were at the top of their creative peak. John said he had a backlog of songs he and Paul had written, as well as unfinished ideas. He believed he could complete as many as 50 songs written by Lennon and McCartney to keep the Beatles going for a long time. We had a meeting and agreed we would not stop. We would not give up. Nobody had to know what had happened to Paul. The only question was how. Maxwell suggested a solution. MI5 had expert cosmetic surgeons at their disposal who could create a double from a person of close resemblance in their secret labs. But we had to swear to secrecy. Because of MI5's involvement, the penalty for revealing what we did would be death. We all agreed, and the deal was done. The next day, it was confirmed to the press that the Beatles would stop touring and work only in the recording studio. This would give us breathing space. Next, at our behest, the American teen magazine Tiger Beat, in conjunction with Dick Clark's American Bandstand, held a Paul lookalike contest. The judges were unaware of the seriousness of their task. No winner was ever announced, but there was a winner. His name was William Campbell, and he would become the new Paul McCartney. Although it meant several operations, William Campbell was thrilled with the opportunity to actually become Beatle Paul McCartney. He literally couldn't believe his good fortune. Although William looked a lot like Paul, a number of imperfections needed attention. Improvements including fattening up the top lip, whilst the eyebrows, jaw and ears were also worked on, and eventually the chin. William also underwent speech therapy to acquire the trademark Liverpudlian accent.
How many are bald that you have to wear those wigs?
All of us.
I'm bald. You're bald? Oh, we're all bald. Don't tell anyone, please. I'm deaf and dumb, too.
Though he was right-handed, he would be playing bass guitar only in the studio, so no one would be the wiser. After the first plastic surgery, John gave William the nickname False Paul. He quickly shortened that to just Fall, in case he was overheard. But we were worried. What if the deception failed and our fans found us out? We would be hated worldwide forever. John recalled a book by author Stephen Crane called The Open Boat. It was a tale of 4 men trapped in a lifeboat at sea, and one dies. When the remaining 3 reached shore, they covered up the death, but wrote about it in poetry. So, John suggested we place visual clues on our album covers and write hints about Paul's accident and song lyrics. If the truth ever emerged, we could say we were forced into silence by MI5 under the threat of death. But we had tried to signal our fans this might allow us to survive the public outrage. Fall was hired on salary, and we did not wish to share royalty earnings with him. So a publishing company was formed by John, Ringo, and myself. John wanted to make a strong reference to Paul and proposed it be named a Paul Corporation. To be less obvious, he agreed to Apple Corporation. Our sorrow over Paul's death was immeasurable. Though we needed Fall to continue the Beatles, it was still strange replacing our friend. Ringo began calling Fall Rubber Paul because of the plastic surgery. John felt this would be a perfect name for our first album without the real Paul McCartney. I said this name would be way too obvious. So John suggested instead Rubber Soul to indicate the false soul in what was becoming Paul's body. None of us could get Paul's lonely funeral at Blackpool out of our minds. So we had the band photograph taken from the perspective of Paul looking up from the grave. To help hide Fall's differences, a distortion lens was used to give a distorted image so we all looked different, and Fall would not stand out as the bloody imposter he really was. The press adored our mop-top look, but in reality, the long bangs were used to cover up Fall's scars from surgery. John shaped the album title as an upside-down heart, commonly associated with a lost love. Ringo, a card player, loved this because it was also the shape of a spade, and the ace of spades was known as the dead man's card. On the Rubber Soul back cover, though we all smoked, Fall was the only Beatle shown smoking a fag. In England, back in the 60s, cigarettes were known as coffin nails, so we thought this to be an appropriate clue. In fact, Fall took up smoking marijuana, which he said helped him ease his stress over the surgeries. For the Nowhere Man single cover, we had Fall look in a different direction than the real Beatles, and you can see his right eye swollen from cosmetic surgery. In the song lyrics, obviously, Paul is our nowhere man. He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land. Nowhere man, can you see me at all? Paul's death made us contemplate the afterlife. Ringo had remarked that Paul, a perfectionist, might be a ghost amongst us. So we called to him to go in peace. Nowhere man, don't worry. Leave it all till somebody else. William Campbell would carry on for him. Girl was about Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend.
Paul, what about you and Jane Asher? What's the story on you and Jane now?
I haven't said anything to anyone, but people keep writing about it. I'm getting to believe it, you know.
We had Fall break up with her by way of typewritten letter because we felt she couldn't be trusted to keep the secret. Another song was about looking at Fall. I'm looking through you. You don't look different, but you have changed. I'm looking through you. You're not the same. You could see Paul for an instant, and then you realize it is Fall. We named the next album Revolver to represent the revolving door through which Paul left the Beatles and William Campbell, Fall, had entered the band. William emerged from a second facial surgery with face swollen and sporting new scars. So for the album cover, a band photograph was deemed too risky. Instead, a drawing was used. Paul is the only Beatle facing away, symbolizing his separateness and showing only one eye, the way we last saw Paul on that awful night. Next, we placed an open palm next to Paul's head. The common misconception is that this is an Indian symbol for death, but no such Indian sign exists. The open palm is in fact the final position of the hand gestures made by priests to bless a body before burial. At Paul's funeral, the priest held his hand in that position whilst we lowered Paul's coffin. Next, we placed a photo of Paul screaming in agony as we imagined him in the accident. Finally, coming out of Paul's ear, John put a strange little fellow who was signaling the audience to listen closely for clues. The press didn't understand that we played pop music. We were not musical virtuosos.
How highly would you rate your own music?
We're not very good musicians, you know, and we never claim to be very good musicians. We're adequate, but not very good.
Yeah, because people admire your talent.
Well, I don't know, you know, maybe they admire adequate music.
Fall was improving his bass playing and singing, but it still wasn't the same. So I suggested we add new effects and experimental sounds to help cover up Fall's voice and bass work, all the while distracting the public with our new sounds. John and Paul had written most of the Beatles songs, becoming one of the most revered songwriting teams in pop music, so I was never asked to contribute much. However, now I was needed, and John asked me to do whatever I could. I added Indian music and backward recorded guitar phrases, whilst John concentrated on studio effects. I also penned a new song called Taxidermist, to whom Paul had gone after the accident. This time it was Ringo who pointed out my song title was too obvious a clue, and suggested the title be changed to just Taxman. We shout the word Paul at the end of every phrase. If you drive a car, Paul. If you get too cold, Paul. In the end, you have to see the taxidermist to preserve your remains for the funeral. My advice to those who die, Taxman. Eleanor Rigby is about Paul's secret funeral near Liverpool, an abandoned church graveyard in the town of Blackpool. It was attended only by myself, Ringo and John, and Paul's parents. A small and lonely gathering for a man who was loved by so many. Ah, look at all the lonely people. Ah, look at all the lonely people. John wanted to call the priest Father McCartney in reference to Paul's dad, but it was too obvious a clue. Father McCartney had started to recount Paul's life, but abandoned the effort when he realized the few of us already knew everything. Father McKinsey, writing the words of a sermon that no one will hear, no one comes near. The grave was dug in advance so no workers would recognize us. The priest made hand gestures from side to side then held up his hand as we lowered the coffin and covered up the grave ourselves. Father McKinsey, wiping the dirt from his hands as he walks from the grave. No one was saved. We called our next album Yesterday and Today, to delineate the new from the old band. I believe John was feeling guilty about our great deception. Now he began insisting on stronger clues for the album cover. So he used bloody meat and baby doll parts to represent the horrific nature of Paul's accident. John placed 2 decapitated dolls on Paul's shoulders, pointing toward his head, a reference to Paul's decapitation. On Paul's right arm, he placed Paul's teeth, knocked out by the car crash, and John told Paul not to smile since his teeth were on his arm. I am holding a baby doll head next to Paul's head, complete with burnt-off hair and no teeth. This cover photo was submitted to Capitol Records. The very next day, John burst into the studio screaming, "That wanker Maxwell showed up at me flat this morning with one of his bloody goons. He punched me in me side and put me in a headlock. And Maxwell said he'd snap off me head and I'd look just like Paul if we don't change the album cover." I told John, "Sounds like a good idea, John." It was going a bit far. He did not try to stop me as I called Capitol Records and withdrew the cover. A new photo shoot was hastily arranged later that day. This time we put Paul inside a trunk, representing a casket. In fact, when the cover is turned on its side, Paul appears to be lying in a coffin. I also remember a scar could be seen on Paul's upper lip from plastic surgery. Meanwhile, John was steaming about being forced by Maxwell to do a new cover and was holding his right side where he'd been punched. I suggested to John that we use the song names as clues to Paul's death, and he loved the idea. Drive My Car was what Paul was doing when he was killed. I'm Only Sleeping is what Paul looked like dead. Dr. Robert was the plastic surgeon who turned William Campbell into Paul. Yesterday was about John's sorrow. Act naturally is what we all tried to do so Paul could pass as Paul. Finally, We Can Work It Out was about our decision not to give up. John wrote Yesterday for Paul, but agreed to change it to she instead of he. Why she had to go, I don't know. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. John was still overridden with grief over the row he had with Paul, in which Paul left the studio in such haste. Dr. Robert's surgeries on William were amazing. In ongoing procedures, William was becoming a convincing fool. You're a new and better man. He does everything he can. No one can succeed like Dr. Robert. John was growing increasingly frustrated with the deception, and at the same time, Paul's absence in his life as a creative force left John feeling incredibly lonely. His great companion had been gone for over a year, and it was clearly affecting him. Thus, John named our next album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And he would flood Sgt. Pepper's with clues. Both Ringo and I warned him it was a dangerous game, that too many clues might be noticed and the Beatles would end. Not to mention the threat of death we were under from MI5. But our arguments fell on deaf ears. In Paul's absence, it was John's band, and John had the final say.
Do you have any acknowledged leader of the group? No, not really.
John designed the front cover as a funeral scene. The foreground is a freshly dug piece of earth, complete with floral decoration and a bass drum gravestone facing the grave. The crowd was made up of the people that Paul would have wanted at his funeral. John even went a step further. Every member attending was dead, had a near-death experience, or had portrayed death. Edgar Allan Poe died an awful death. Marilyn Monroe was a suicide. And Bob Dylan had claimed a near-fatal motorbike crash in the summer of 1966, even though that was just an excuse to enter drug rehab. On the bass drum gravestone, John created a clue requiring a mirror. In the middle of Lonely Hearts, you get the message 111, axe, eat, die. The 3 ones represented the 3 live Beatles, and Paul was the axe, meaning he had been crossed out, dead. Cleverly enough, it also showed the date of Paul's demise. The first 2 numbers being 11 for the month of November, and the next 2 digits IX, the Roman numeral for 9, November 9. To the left, we are depicted as we were at Paul's funeral. Ringo had been crying, but said he could feel Paul comforting him as we peered down into the grave. Next, John placed an arrangement of yellow flowers to form Paul's left-handed bass guitar, with 3 wires for strings to signify only 3 remaining Beatles. The bass also formed a P for Paul when turned on its side. Another clue started with the word ear in the bass drum. Just under that, Paul's rugby trophy served as the letter I, spelling lies, while the arrangement of yellow flowers spelled Paul. Here lies Paul. On the far right, John placed a doll, and on her lap was a model of the white Austin Healey Paul was driving when he had the fatal crash. The doll was placed in the lap of a deathly-looking shrouded figure to represent the angel of death, who wore a blood-stained driver's glove in his left hand. Just above the B, John placed another doll, but split the head open to symbolize Paul's head injury. The priest's open hand was again above Paul's head, but this time it belonged to Stephen Crane, author of The Open Boat, that helped inspire us to pull off the cover-up. John, Ringo and I posed for the photo, but for Paul, a cardboard cutout was used, propped up by the rest of us, just like in real life. Next to Diana Dawes, John placed a mirror image of a walrus to illustrate Paul's final state of being. The inner sleeve looks quite innocent until you realize it's soaking up red blood. On the back cover, we faced Paul away to again symbolize he was not a real Beatle. John made sure the lyrics "Without You" were printed on Paul's head, while I'm pointing at the lyric "Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock," indicating the time of Paul's death. Finally, Paul is wearing a badge on his left arm with the initials OPD, officially pronounced dead. Despite all the album cover clues, John was not satisfied. In fact, he invented a new way of hiding clues by inserting audio messages in reverse, hidden by the original recording, so they could only be heard by playing the album backwards. Thus, John coined the term backwards masking. I thought this silly at first, but then realized it was not as risky as album cover clues. Record players only played forwards. Perhaps if John were encouraged in this direction, he might completely stop with album cover clues before we were caught. In the title track, the line about Billy Shears is a play on words. Let me introduce you to the one and only Billy Shears. We're introducing William. Billy's here. Because we didn't want the Beatles to end. I don't really want to stop the show. On the reprise, John reveals the truth about Foal's disguise, using backwards masking. It was a fake mustache. Once Foal's surgeries were complete, he was eager to appear on telly. I remember he gave an interview with his fake mustache covering his scar and tried to sound smart, but he didn't know anything.
It's just a straightforward endeavor kind of thing, just to do something other than what's been done before, because what's been done before isn't necessarily the answer.
In Getting Better, we're encouraging Fall, who was in fact mastering his Paul imitation. I have to admit it's getting better, a little better all the time. On the reverse, John describes Paul's crash scene. Many other clues to Paul's car accident were placed throughout the album. Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day began. When I caught a glimpse of Rita, I took her home. I nearly made it. The news was rather sad. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. Nothing to do to save his life. You are on your own. You are in the street. Never glimpsed the truth. If they only knew. We were talking about the love that's gone so cold, and the people who gain the world but lose their soul. Life flows on within you and without you. We missed Paul so much, we decided to try something desperate. We sought the help of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
When through the practice of transcendental meditation, the mind goes deep within to the source of thought, transcends the thought and gains bliss consciousness, and is capable of maintaining that even when it comes out into the worldly experience of objective nature. It is called spiritual life.
We wanted him to direct Paul's soul to enter and take over Paul's body.
This is life in eternal liberation. And without this, life is in bondage. A great loss. Loss of eternal bliss consciousness and gain of a worldly fleeting joy.
He agreed to try if we came to his ashram in India. So we went. Mia Farrow was there for some reason, having just left Frank Sinatra.
But if the waves could deepen and incorporate more silent levels of the water, the waves could become the waves of the ocean, the mighty waves. This is what happens in transcendental meditation. the surface activity of the conscious mind deepens and incorporates within its fold the depth of the subconscious.
Of course, the idea to put Paul's soul into Fall didn't succeed. Yes, I know, it was a crazy idea, but we were going out of our heads with grief. Fall enjoyed the trip. I remember Fall smiled and picked his nose a lot. We never told him why we went, because if it had worked, William Campbell would have ceased to exist. He thought we were there to learn transcendental meditation or something like that. He was so stupid. He really had no idea. When we realized it didn't work, we flew back to England, disappointed, never to return. John had pushed the idea of dropping clues of Paul's death much further on Sgt. Pepper's. Of course, it would be a disaster if someone put the clues together. Our fans would hate us for the deception, and the Beatles would be finished. And then there was the nasty little matter of MI5, promising death would come knocking on our door. As we began a new recording session, I was summoned to the telephone. It was Maxwell. He told me straight up the Sgt. Pepper's cover was obviously a funeral for Paul. I know you wankers are up to something. You best be careful. And then he hung up. I went to John and begged him to discontinue all clues to Paul's death. That Maxwell was on to us and we'd given enough clues already. However, John's placing clues now seemed to be the driving force, inspiring him to write music. But now I thought he was reckless. How could we sell millions of albums and the clues not be discovered? Fall was becoming a better singer and bass player, and the surgeries were coming to an end. Perhaps that would dispel the clues if they got noticed. Or so I hoped. Fall turned to marijuana to ease the anxiety over the cosmetic surgeries. But then he experimented with LSD a few times and was stupid enough to tell reporters.
How often have you taken LSD?
About 4 times.
Somehow Fall did not understand how the media works.
Do you believe that this was a matter which you should have kept private?
But the thing is, that I was asked a question by a newspaper. And the decision was whether to tell a lie or to tell him the truth, I decided to tell him the truth. I'll keep it a personal thing. If he does too, if he keeps it quiet. But he wanted to spread it, so it's his responsibility, for spreading it, not mine. The whole bit about how far it's going to go and how many people it's going to encourage is up to the newspapers and up to you, on television. I mean, you're spreading this now at this moment. This is going into all the homes, in Britain. And I'd rather it didn't, I'm quite prepared to keep it as a very personal thing, if you will too.
On the Magical Mystery Tour album cover, Fall was dressed as a hippopotamus with a gaping hole in his chest. John said it was to depict Fall as having no heart and no soul, since he wasn't real. John dressed himself as the walrus to again identify with Paul, who really was the walrus. The grotesque decapitated head on the side of the road we'd all witnessed. Next, John designed Beatles, so when the album was turned upside down, it became a phone number, 537-1438. John had secured this number on the London Phone Exchange and forwarded it to a funeral home. In the gatefold, Paul's drawing is the only one whose face is covered and eyes closed, a reference to his burial. Meanwhile, Capitol Records accidentally used an inside sleeve photo that exposed Fall looking very little like Paul McCartney. back cover was designed to appear as a random pattern, but when turned 90 degrees, the white figures spell out the letters R.I.P., John telling his comrade to rest in peace. John also added a grisly image of a decapitated man with a clean cut above the shoulder, Paul's last state of being. At the beginning of the album, John inserted a screeching of tires and a loud explosion. A car crash. I was furious. I reminded John that MI5 was watching us. I threatened to quit, as I figured we'd be dead anyway. He grudgingly acquiesced. However, when the album was published, I discovered the car crash, backwards masked with the right stereo mix in the middle of the first song. I Am the Walrus was inspired by John, screaming the same at Maxwell at the scene of Paul's accident. On the single, John placed I Am the Walrus right across Fall's head. He was wearing a fake mustache to hide the scars on his upper lip. The Eggman is Humpty Dumpty, who had cracked his head open, just like Paul. The umpire phrases at the end are actually us gloating over how we'd succeeded in replacing Paul, and no one was the wiser. I say, bury me, bury my body, oh untimely death, at the end of the song.
Bury my body. Oh, untimely death.
In Strawberry Fields, the lyrics are directed at the fans. Living is easy with eyes closed. It was easy for them to enjoy the Beatles, but we were incredibly stressed at maintaining the deception. It's getting hard to be someone. Nothing is real. At the very end of the song, John says, I buried Paul. Hello, Goodbye is Fall speaking to the ghost of Paul. You say goodbye, and I say hello. In Blue Jay Way, Paul is depicted trapped in the burning car. Please don't be long, for I may be asleep. On the reverse is a reference that Paul was going to the gods. He said, get me out.
Save me out. Save me out.
Paul is Hare Krishna, it seems. On the day of the Magical Mystery Tour release, Maxwell appeared at Abbey Road Studios with 4 tough-looking MI5 agents. Maxwell put his foot right through Ringo's bass drum head as Ringo fell backwards. He ordered us come. John, Paul, Ringo and I silently followed, with the 4 toughs in behind. We once again piled into Maxwell's large black van and sped off. Arriving at a warehouse, the agents exited the van, each dragging one of us by the hair and then slamming us against a wall. Fall begged them not to punch him in the face. Maxwell wailed, "Listen, you cunts! I told you to stop this stupid game of dropping clues about your dead comrade. My agents called the number and got the funeral home. We used our best plastic surgeons on this problem. If we are found out, it's going to jeopardize support for the intelligence service. In case you didn't know, we are facing down the KGB all across Europe. We can't allow you cunts to endanger our operations, nor Her Majesty's kingdom, nor the free world for that matter. If we see any more clues, we'll have no problem arranging a car accident or for a deranged fan to off the lot of you." Maxwell nodded and each of us got a hard punch to the stomach from our personal goon. We were driven back to the studio, not saying a word. Deeply shaken, we agreed the new album would simply be called The Beatles, with a blank white front and back cover to satisfy Maxwell. However, John insisted that as Maxwell had mentioned merely the album covers, we could still place clues in songs. Despite everything, John clearly designed the titles so that when holding a mirror to the Beatles, it reveals the message, "He be ice" for Paul, alongside the number 3 for the 3 remaining Beatles. With no album cover to place clues on, John created a collage poster that was included with the LP. At bottom appears the passport photo of William Campbell, used for his Paul McCartney lookalike competition entry form. At bottom right is an old photo of Paul dancing and 2 skeletal hands reaching for him. Just to right center, John placed a strange photo of a dead-looking Paul in driver's cap and scarf. Another photo of Paul was symbolic of his decapitated head floating in blood. 4 individual photos of the band also came along with the LP. We purposely made very somber faces to show we were in mourning. One can see a scar on Paul's upper lip from plastic surgery, and the shining new nose that turned William Campbell into a Paul McCartney double. On the White Album lyrics, John wrote Paul's death into most songs and added more backwards masking than ever before. I worried the lyrics were becoming way too obvious and was afraid Maxwell would take notice and make good on his promise. However, John insisted he would likely just smile and toss out the album when he saw the cover. In Glass Onion, I told you about the walrus in me. Well, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. Everyone thought John was referring to the walrus on the cover of the Magical Mystery Tour album, as they didn't know about the accident. In the fade-out of my guitar, I cry out for Paul. I'm so tired was gibberish played forward, but in reverse, it tells how we felt. In Revolution number 9, the number 9 is used for 9 letters in McCartney. And in reverse, the phrase recognizes Paul's continuing inspiration. Then John uses a car crash and a cry for help as another clue. John wrote USSR because of Maxwell's comments about the KGB. In the Road, backwards, it's the truth. Don't pass me by. You were in a car crash and you lost your hair. Don't make me cry. Revolution number 9. His eye was eye, and his eyes were closed. My fingers are broken, and so is my hair. He hit a pole. We'd better get him to see a surgeon. My wings are broken. You become naked. As we'd heard nothing from MI5 after the White Album, John decided to place a few clues on the Yellow Submarine album cover. On top of the mountain is the Sgt. Pepper's Band. Once again, Paul appeared with an open-palmed hand above his head. But this time, John makes the sign of the priest. The rest of us are pointing toward the ground, showing what's buried. The old group right next to the submarine, a metaphor for Paul's coffin. All of this as the Lord Mayor points upwards to the sky to signify one of the group has gone to heaven.
Did Mystery Tour put you off making a film completely yourselves?
Yeah, we're only ever going to be cartoons forever now, because they really put us off those.
It's a new career piece.
Those no good damn critics.
The Yellow Submarine represents a coffin. We all live in a yellow submarine. As we were standing in the cemetery, it looked like a land of coffins, in the land of submarines. They were buried beneath a sea of green grass, underneath the blue sky, sky of blue and sea of green, in our yellow submarine. On All Together Now, on reverse, we mention Paul's funeral. John's northern song was too obvious a clue. You may think that the band is not quite right. The band is a little dark and out of key. You're correct. There's nobody there. I began to worry more and more that John was on a reckless path. Emboldened again by lack of reaction from Maxwell, John decided to push ahead once more with album cover clues. I advised against it, but again, it landed on deaf ears. The Abbey Road album cover was made to emulate a funeral scene. John, in pure white, was Jesus. Ringo, dressed in full black, was the pallbearer. I was in scruffy denim jeans and shirt, the gravedigger. Fall was, of course, the corpse, dressed in a shabby, outdated suit with eyes closed and barefoot. In the original photo, John had poured red paint as blood stains and even drew a body outline on Abbey Road. However, these were retouched as best possible when even John realized he'd gone too far. As before, we showed Fall out of sync with the band. Ringo, John and I have our left leg forward. Only Fall is stepping with his right. Fall is also holding a cigarette, a coffin nail, in his right hand, rather than left-handed as the real Paul would. Behind me, John arranged for a VW Beetle with a number plate LMW 28 if, because Paul would have been 28 if he had survived. Outside the Abbey Road Studios entrance, John placed 3 people dressed in white to indicate the presence of only 3 righteous Beatles. Meanwhile, a black police van is parked on the right side of the street, with a man playing Maxwell watching over us. Beginning with the Beetle, a line could be drawn connecting the right wheels of 4 cars running straight through Fall's head, referring to the head-splitting injury. On the back cover, on the left of the name Beatles, were 8 dots, which made the number 3 for 3 Beatles, with a crack through the letter S. Next, The Grim Reaper can be seen from his skull head to his long black gown when the cover is turned to the left. The girl in the light blue dress is Rita, rushing off from the crash scene to call for help.
MI5 had given Rita a new identity, including plastic surgery for life and money to buy her silence.
John had false sing "Oh Darlin'," but backwards in "He Lives Me." But we knew this was wishful thinking because the India trip didn't work. Come Together is a composition about a dead person and what happens to a corpse. 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. He got monkey fingers. Here come old Flat Top. He got juju eyeball. He wear no shoe shine. He won spinal cracker. Got to be good looking 'cause he's so hard to see. Come together right now over me. Our worst nightmare was set into motion on 12 October 1969. Russell Gibb, a radio disc jockey in Detroit, announced that Paul McCartney was dead.
Paul McCartney was killed in an automobile accident in early November 1966 after leaving EMI recording studios, tired, sad, and dejected.
His proof? Evidence strewn throughout the Beatles' album artwork and song lyrics. He played Revolution 9 backwards on the air, and everyone heard "Turn Me On, Dead Man."
Well, the Beatles are still a quartet. Rumors for the past few days that Paul McCartney was dead came to a head yesterday.
Newspaper and television reporters picked up the story, and the news quickly spread across America, and it gained critical mass across the world as international media picked up the story.
There was even one report that McCartney was killed 3 years ago in an auto accident and a double put in his place.
Have you ever trained or used Beatle doubles as decoys?
No. Celebrity lawyer F. Lee Bailey hosted a television special.
Listen to the evidence and decide whether Paul McCartney is dead, and if he is not dead, whether somebody is trying to persuade us that he is.
And other radio and TV programs added to the explosion.
And others think that they may have some clues that Mr. McCartney is in fact dead, has been for some time, and that his associates, the Beatles, are constantly trying to inform us of that fact.
Now, Maxwell had certainly seen our entire array of clues from the very beginning. And we were all dead men. John was terrified that he and his wife and child would be killed in a car crash, courtesy of Maxwell. So to protect his family, he announced he was divorcing and moved out of his house. John said he would escape to America immediately. What about the rest of us? I asked as we huddled at Ringo's flat, trying to think of something before Maxwell came for us. Ringo was petrified and just said nothing. Ringo was the luckiest man on the planet. He really didn't have much talent nor personality.
Being bored of being the Beatles after all this time? No, I'm having a great time.
He was just happy to be there.
You going to work now? I think it may be tea time with any luck.
I moaned at John. We had a double. The Beatles continued. We made a lot of money. Why should we be dead like Paul? Why couldn't you just let it be? John answered, "Okay, I'll just let it be. We'll make one last album to throw off suspicion. I'm about out of material from Paul anyway. Let's call the album, as you say, Let It Be. We'll end the Beatles and just let it be." You ring Maxwell, let him know we're ending the Beatles in 6 months. Maybe there'll be no need for him to kill us. This seemed the only plausible course of action. If we ended the Beatles just now after all the public outburst of Paul's death, it would be confirmed as the reason for the band's demise. I telephoned Maxwell and explained we would make a public effort to say Paul's death rumors were a hoax. And make one last album to fool the public. We would then end the Beatles and take the secret with us. Maxwell replied, I never should have trusted you wankers. You'll be joining Paul soon enough. And hung up.
Linda Eastman, a rock photographer from New York, married Paul McCartney and broke 1 million female hearts.
Within a week, we were shocked when Paul married an American photographer named Linda Eastman, who had been photographing us since the early days.
When did you decide to get married, Paul?
About a week ago.
We considered her dangerous because she had had a crush on Paul, and we were terrified she might discover the deception.
Linda, how do you feel about it all? You're obviously terribly happy. How are you feeling this morning?
Terribly happy.
Paul explained that Linda had confronted him with photographic evidence proving he was an imposter. She offered to keep silent in exchange for marriage.
What prompted it?
Just, so we decided to do it instead of thinking about it.
And if he would help her become a singer and musician. Paul said he only had 2 choices. He could tell Maxwell, who would have her killed, or acquiesce. He kind of fancied her, so he chose the latter. We put out the word to the press that Paul was alive and well.
On October the 22nd, I received a phone call from a man who said he was Paul McCartney.
And what did he claim? That the whole thing was a lie or a hoax? Or
Well, we asked him, of course. We were interested in the symbolism, if there was any, and why they had done certain things. And he said that there was no symbolism, nothing intended. It was very spontaneous.
Denied it all?
Yes, he did.
Paul, who had gone into hiding in central England, was ordered to emerge for an interview and photo shoot with Life magazine to prove Paul wasn't dead.
Why don't we get the rumors out of the way? What could you say to dispel these rumors that have started in the United States? I can't say anything,
The press seemed satisfied that Paul was alive, and the frenzy subsided as we announced our return to the studio to record another album. Paul's chin was caving due to all the surgeries, so it was decided he should wear a fake beard in the meantime. The 5 surgeries also had Paul looking older than the rest of us, so we all grew longer hair, and Ringo and I grew mustaches, so we would all look a bit older and Paul would not stand out. On the Let It Be album cover, the black background was a sign of our continued mourning. John, Ringo and I have white backgrounds, whilst Paul's is blood red. The real Beatles are facing left, whilst Paul looks straight ahead again, to show he's not one of us. A microphone was used to help obscure Paul's chin and fake beard. For the back cover, we designed a very sad atmosphere to emulate an obituary for the Beatles. We each chose photos, including Paul, showing a great upset, with John actually bawling tears. For the inside cover, we told Paul to hold his neck in a way to emulate decapitation. On another photo of Paul, a microphone is again used to once again hide his chin and fake beard. The end of the saga of the Beatles and the torturous cover-up was signified by the title track, Let It Be. And when the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer. Let it be. We knew our fans would be broken-hearted, but the only answer at this point was let it be. When you play it backwards, Fall says he's dead. In the long and winding road, one last time, we recall the terrible night Paul died, and we all cried. The wild and windy night has left a pool of tears, crying for the day. On Get Back, we have Fall sing, "Help me, help me." In Dig a Pony and I've Got a Feeling, we give a nod to Fall, William Campbell, without whom the Beatles would have ended long ago. Well, you can imitate anyone you know. All that I was looking for was somebody who looked like you. John added one last line backwards.
Vroeg, Gio, masgoed, vroeg, Gio, masgoed, vroeg, Gio, masgoed.
When Let It Be was released, it was simultaneously announced the Beatles were splitting up. Even so, John was still terrified of Maxwell and MI5. He was certain they knew him to be the main culprit in placing all the clues. So John latched on to a Japanese singer named Yoko Ono and quickly moved to New York City, where he thought he would be safer. I remember he pretended to be interested in some kind of screeching thing that Yoko did.
Can you describe your new act together? What is howling?
An expression that's not so intellectualized as words, you know. It's just like...
pure sound. Show me
pure sound. Well, anything. Wow, that's howling.
John thought that if he appeared to be some kind of nut, that Maxwell would lose interest in him.
They're on all the time selling their war and selling their products. We must do the same. You can make it, man. We can make it together. We can get it together. We can get it together.
Then he got into being naked with her for the public.
Their bed-in was a demonstration for world peace.
He started doing peace demonstrations in bed.
We're thinking that instead of going out and fight and make war or something like that, we should just stay in bed. Everybody should just stay in bed and enjoy the spring, you know.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, you know, I just say, but whatever, violence begets violence, and you know, I don't believe in anything else, and I don't believe there's any park or anything worth getting shot for. You don't need all that education. You don't need to get your whatever it is, exams that you're going to finish. What for? To turn into them? Stay at home or stay in bed or make love, not war. That's all we're saying.
I think they might think I'm going to hot up the revolution. You know, I want to cool it down. This money, I'm using my money and my time to promote peace. And when the money runs out, the time runs out, we should have peace by then.
Despite all of this, MI5 used their contacts with the CIA to try to get John deported from America and back to England, where he would be more vulnerable.
John, why are you being deported?
Well, the sort of official reason is something about we overstayed, both of us, so that's reason enough to throw us out. The other official reason is that I was bussed in England for pot. And the real reason is because...
What the immigration is asking me to do, really, is to take a decision on whether choosing my husband or my child.
The end of Fall's Road was supposed to coincide with the end of the Beatles, but Fall didn't respect this because he loved being Paul McCartney so much. Fall felt strongly he would be protected by MI5, so he published his first solo album. Fall became very arrogant. He even went back to playing guitar right-handed for the cover of Britain's Disco magazine. Fall never stopped his pot smoking that he'd started with the cosmetic surgeries.
The ex-Beatle headed for Japan for a series of sold-out concerts.
He was busted in Japan. Fall later became something of a marijuana advocate.
This substance, cannabis, is a whole lot less harmful than rum punch, whiskey, nicotine, and glue, all of which are perfectly legal.
Hello, everybody in Japan. Hope we can come back sometime and not disappoint you next time.
McCartney arrived at Tokyo International Airport with his wife, Linda, and 4 children.
Found marijuana in his luggage.
Hello, people of Japan. Don't worry, we'll see you when we come back to your beautiful country. Hi, Laura.
It's all over. This is over.
Linda McCartney, the wife of pop singer Paul McCartney, was arrested at Heathrow Airport this afternoon.
Mrs. McCartney was herself charged after British cops found a small amount of cannabis in her possession. To the McCartneys, it seems, the family that gets by stays high.
Fall went on to have a decent career, and he was respectful enough not to attend the Beatles' induction ceremony into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988.
We had the Hall of Fame, the reunion of you and Ringo there, and Paul McCartney didn't turn up for that one, and he sent a telegram saying that he thought it was a fake reunion and he'd feel like a hypocrite going.
Well, unfortunately, you know, Fall is a hypocrite. He put another nail in his own coffin as Fall's wife Linda was cursing. She wanted badly to go to that show.
Are you saddened that Paul McCartney wasn't able to appear?
It didn't spoil our night. We still had fun without him.
On 1 August 1993, Fall rang me in terrible distress. He said Rita had contacted him. She demanded he divorce Linda and marry her in exchange for continued silence. I told Fall to ring Maxwell for advice. But to my horror, a week later, Rita was run over by a motorbike in London. MI5 didn't succeed in killing her, but she had one leg amputated. Despite this, I was sure Fall had not heard the last from Heather Mills, which was the new identity MI5 had given to Rita in 1966.
I have a box of evidence should anything happen to me. There is such a fear from a certain party of the truth coming out. If you top me off, the truth will come out.
Are you ready? Let me say it first. You repeat it after me. John. Paul. George. Ringo. I give you the one and only fabulous Beatles.
Fall deserves an immense thank you because he sacrificed his life for the Beatles. And he saved the lives of countless fans who would have killed themselves had Paul's death been made public. I couldn't resist saluting Fall in my first solo album, a backwards reference to the real Paul. He never wore his shoes. We all know he was dead. I felt if I kept a high profile, it was less likely that Maxwell and his toughs would try to off me. So I made the rounds of television shows like Dick Cavett and the Smothers Brothers. I made a very few albums and did only an occasional tour, preferring to stay safely locked away in my estate as much as possible.
And some say hiding behind the secure walls of his country estate outside London.
Fans feel I have a reputation for being surly.
George Harrison, the youngest, was always the most uncomfortable with the Beatles' extraordinary celebrity, and after it was over, his withdrawal was the most painful.
But in fact, I just didn't like to answer Beatles' questions and have to continue to lie.
Do you think that in the new year that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being as a group?
No.
No? What about another word?
It's hard for Australians, I'm sure, when you think of the Beatles' tours to Australia, it's hard for an Australian to believe that you three guys who remain don't get on.
We all have concepts of each other, you know?
I don't expect you to go into the finances of it, the details, but is it really, a question over $1 million or $100 million? Is that the sort of thing?
It's not really to do with anything like that. It's the personal problem Paul had, which was not actually his problem, it was mine and Ringo, because of what the history should show. As soon as we do that, Paul will be free of any problem he may have of us, because I don't have time to screw around anymore, you know?
Nor did I like to answer questions about Paul, who really was just a fraud.
How did you feel when you heard the McCartney versions of the old songs on Broad Street?
I didn't notice that they were new versions.
He said that he wanted to tackle some of the other old songs, including possibly some of John Lennon's songs.
Maybe because he ran out of good ones of his own.
And it was 20 years ago that John rang me from New York and said he felt enough time had passed and it was time to tell the truth, and that he'd also rung Paul about his plans.
And we all discovered that the values didn't mean a thing, you know.
I had warned him that there could be unforeseen consequences, that I feared for his safety, as well as opening a lot of old wounds. John dismissed my concerns, the idealist he always was.
I can't wait, you know, I just can't wait. I'm so glad to be around.
But before he could go public, only 2 weeks later, he was killed, exactly as Maxwell had threatened he would be.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room. He was dead on arrival.
Under heavy guard, Mark Chapman was brought from prison to the State Supreme Court in Manhattan to hear the judge's sentence. Chapman showed no emotion whatsoever when the sentence of 20 years to life was handed out. Then a leading psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Schwartz, was called to the witness box.
I think he's basically a schizophrenic who has, to a certain extent, lived in a fantasy world.
In his evidence, Dr. Schwartz said that at first Chapman had idolized the pop star. Chapman, a loner who lived in a bizarre world of make-believe, claimed he'd received orders to kill Lennon from Satan.
I recall Paul was unsympathetic about the news.
What were you recording today? I was just listening to some stuff, you know, I just didn't want to sit at home. Why? Oh, God, I didn't feel like it.
What time did you hear the news?
This morning sometime. Very early. Yeah. Don't know, yeah? Drag, isn't it?
How could Paul be unshaken? It seems strange, but at the time, I recall only thinking Paul forgot to keep up the act. Perhaps because he was never as close to John as the real Beatles. But now that I think about it, he acted like a man who was not surprised by John's death.
I didn't feel like it. Drag, isn't it? Okay, cheers.
Could he have known about it in advance?
When John passed, I was in Sussex, at my home in Sussex. That's where I was.
Now, here I am, in hospital. And last night, I fear Maxwell was at work once again, trying to silence me. And Paul was the only one I told I was going public. I have to wonder. I don't know now what to do, other than sort away these cassette tapes in hopes that it will protect me. I am George Harrison, and I hope this is not my last testament.
But it was great. You know, in all these, well, actually in John's case, I was going to say in all these tragedies, in George's case, in that tragedy, there were some good things about it.